I'm Mike Vardy.
Meal planning is important because it prevents us from being a disappointed wreck when dinner time comes around and we have no clue what to make, or even if we have the ingredients to make the meal. It's a time and a money saver, but most importantly, it frees up valuable brain space. Creating a meal plan prepares us for the week to come and gives us peace of mind that we're organized and can feed ourselves and our family. That's why I do it, and that's why Plan to Eat helps me do it. Your subscription includes access to the Plan to Eat website and fully featured mobile apps on iOS and Android. And Plan to Eat gives you the tools to clip and organize recipes from any website, the ones your family loves and that fit your dietary preferences and needs. And you can create a meal plan around your schedule. Then what happens is the Plan to Eat software automatically creates an organized shopping list based on your plan. So sign up for your free trial at plantoeat.com/timecrafting. That's plantoeat.com/timecrafting. The coupon will be automatically applied to your account and can be used when you're ready to subscribe. It's valid for new customers only. Give Plan to Eat a try today.
And this is the Productivityist Podcast. Hey there, welcome to the Productivityist Podcast. I am your host, Mike Vardy, the founder of Productivityist and productivity strategist and writer and all that fun stuff, speaker, bunch of stuff. I have a lot of things that I do. I have a lot of things that are my primary things, and then some side hustles I work on. And speaking of side hustles, which are actually part of my main hustle, but Nick Loper, who is the guest on this week's show, has a ton of side hustles. In fact, he's the chief side hustler at Side Hustle Nation. I was really happy to have him on the show. We had a chance to meet and not really chat as much as we'd like to at Podcast Movement this past year in Fort Worth, Texas, but we did have some time to, decide whether or not we wanted to hang out and talk and be on have him be on my show. And so that's what we did. We talk a lot today about some of the cool things that he's tried in terms to up his productivity, which some are very conventional and some are not so conventional. But he very much believes in the idea of hustling, and he is a true Renaissance man. He's an entrepreneur that's involved in a variety of projects, and he likes to experiment. So if you're the kind of person who likes the biohacking stuff that you hear guys like Ari Meisel and Dave Asprey and Tim Ferriss do, what Nick does is he does this in the business side of things, so the entrepreneurial side of things, and I had a really great time talking with him today, and I hope you enjoy this episode of the show and this discussion I have with Nick Loper right here on the Productivityist Podcast. So I have Nick Loper with me. Nick, thanks for joining me from Side Hustle Nation, taking time out of your side hustles to be part of another side hustle by doing this show.
You bet, Mike. Thanks for having me.
So we've crossed paths on the internet a few times in the past, but we didn't actually really get to meet. I gave you a whiskey, I think, right?
Yes. Oh my gosh, I forgot about that.
Yeah,
that's how we're like best buds.
Yeah. So I gave you, and it was a Japanese whiskey, I think. Was it Japanese?
It was very smoky.
Yeah. It was. Oh, it might have been. I know which one it was. It was one that was recommended to me by another whiskey aficionado. And I think I had to go somewhere. I'm like, I have to go. I can't leave the bar with this. Hey, Nick, here, have this.
It's like, oh, okay.
All right. And so we met. We got to hang out a little bit. Not
this
a
is
lot.
Making a great first impression for your listeners.
Exactly. Here's a whiskey. That's my calling card. I don't have business cards. I just carry around little small snifters of whiskey that I give to everybody. Yeah. But we had a chance to, briefly chat there at the barbecue place too. Not for long because we kind of but that's what happens at events like this, right? Like there's so much going on that you don't really have a chance to chat with as many people as you'd like, or at least have prolonged conversations, I find. Do you find that happens? Because you've been to a lot of events as well.
Yeah, it's a ton of fun because, now, especially having been to a handful, there's kind of a crew of familiar faces, and then it snowballs from there. It's like, oh, have you met so-and-so? Do you know these guys? And then you kind of get introduced around, which is really cool. And, as a new person, I found that was very welcoming. But you're right. It is tough because it's very you feel like, oh my gosh, there's so many people and this is only 2 days and I got to talk to everyone. And so, doing these kind of follow-up things after the fact are very helpful.
So tell everyone that's listening about what you do and about Side Hustle Nation, because now you have a chance to introduce yourself to a fully captive audience that really they won't give you whiskey, but at least they may, but not right away. So tell everybody a little bit about who you are, what you do, for those that might be unfamiliar with your work.
Sure. Side Hustle Nation is a blog podcast for aspiring and part-time entrepreneurs. It shares kind of my adventures in trying to build job-free income streams, as well as kind of case studies and been there, done that stories from other people who have, built something in their spare time and either turned it into their full-time thing, or a lot of people say, hey, I'm kind of happy with my career. I just, wanted to do this for myself as a creative outlet. To build a little more financial security, financial freedom into my life, or to, pay down debt, just earn extra money, earn a little bit of a safety net there.
Now, when you're trying to have these side hustles, I did this for a while, obviously, when I was trying to grow Productivityist, before it was actually known as Productivityist, and work the full-time job and all that stuff. One of the things you reached out to me about was like the productivity tactics, like the hacks that you use, the kind of the weird tactics that you take on in order to make this happen. And not just this happen, but just in general. But before we get into your weird tactics, can you share with me a little bit about what some of the things that you recommend people do who are trying to balance that whole, hey, I've got this full-time thing, but I've got this side hustle that I really want to grow?
The biggest thing for me has been carving out a dedicated time. So when I was still doing it part-time, I was saying, okay, every day. And for me, it was like every day after work, I could go to the gym, have dinner. And then, from 7 to 10, a lot of the days, like that was like side hustle time. And so it was like this dedicated time to carve out. And really what's been helpful is just blocking it out on the calendar. And it's a little more difficult when you've got family and when you've got kids. Luckily, I was in a long distance relationship at that time for a lot of those, at least for a couple of those years. And so that definitely helped. And whether that's, late at night, early in the morning, during your lunch break, I recorded interviews with people like, Skyping from their car and stuff like that, that are trying to make it happen any way they can. But that's been very helpful to me. And then what else I do is kind of the night before itemizing out like my top 3 priorities, knowing, hey, I may only have 15 minutes if something comes up. And if I have an hour, that's great. But these are the tasks that I need to get done. And this is the order I need to get them done in. And so that's been helpful too.
Awesome. I do that a lot. In terms of the planning in the evenings, I think it's really, really critical, especially, and I think that probably was born out of the whole, this isn't my main gig. And you've maintained, like, this isn't your main gig, right? Like, this is your side hustle in and of itself, or is it your main gig at this point?
It is my main. Now, thankfully, I've been self-employed actually since 2008.
So there you go. So you actually are able, and you still do the evening planning, right? You still make sure that you outline things the night before, rather than, kind of wake up in the morning and try to map things out as once you get out of bed, right?
Yeah, it's so much better to kind of have a clearer picture of where that morning is going to go, because otherwise, I'll find myself lying in bed, be like, I could probably hit the snooze alarm again, but it's like, no, I remember I got to do, step 1, step 2, step 3, and kind of gets you excited to tackle this stuff.
One of the things that I found on your blog that I thought was really, really interesting, one of your blog posts, was the 3 laws of side hustle physics. I found it, you're really good with the headlines. I got to give you that. Between the numbered lists, you've got this blog post called 79 Side Hustle Business Ideas You Can Start Today. So set aside some time to read that, everybody. But I want to talk a little bit about those 3 laws before we dive into some of those weird tactics that we want to dive into. Because what you mentioned, like time tracking and stuff and setting up an evening routine, if those are weird, then that's what I teach people. So
we'll get a little weirder than that.
But tell me about those 3 laws of side hustle physics, because first off, you came up with this after, didn't really come up with this, but you're all science. You say in the post you're all scienced up after reading The Martian. Of course, The Martian's been out a few weeks now. I read the movie itself. I've read the book. It's actually the book that got me back into fiction reading, which was great. But tell me a little bit about these 3 laws and tell our listeners about it, because I think that they really do make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I very rarely read fiction. And everybody, I think my wife, we were on a plane and she was like cracking up. She's like an engineer. She's a huge nerd too. And she's just like cracking up while reading this book. And she's like, it's so good. I'm like, fine, I'll read this. And I was like, got totally hooked on it. And so I was like, all excited about science. And you could, like, this is a kind of a blogging hack, right? You could write the 3 laws of, whatever industry physics. Like you could do like these are kind of interchangeable, but I was like, okay, here's the 3 laws of side hustle physics. And, law number 1 is, from Newton, right? An object at rest is going to stay at rest until it's acted upon by an external force. And you think about that in terms of, our lives, like our momentum. Like if we're, sedentary, if we're, not making any progress, like if we're inert, if we're like not in motion, like it's going to take something to get us past that, to get us moving. And I don't know what that force necessarily will be. And that kind of goes into, the second law, but it's like, your pace isn't going to necessarily change until an event, until something happens. And so the second law is that force and impact. And it's like the bigger that force, maybe that's a job loss. Maybe that's, a baby on the way. Maybe that's, a sudden windfall of gas. I don't know what it is, like, a business idea that like hits you on the head. But, basically whatever that thing is, the bigger the impact that is, the faster you're going to accelerate towards that side hustle.
Yeah. So we've got these other laws, right? The force and impact and the action and reaction. I think it's really interesting because I think this has a lot to do with productivity. Like, I mean, a lot of these things, they relate to like, just get up and like, you can't just sit back and let things happen to you. You just can't, you have to make things happen. How do you inspire people to do that when they have this great idea for this thing that they want to build, or they've decided to act upon the 79 side hustle businesses? They're going to make that happen. What do you do to get them to get up and go? Like, what do you recommend to people through either your blog, your podcast, or even just when they work with you one-on-one?
It's such a daunting task. And so it kind of goes back to, how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. And so you kind of have to break it down into, okay, what's the next first step to making this happen? And for a lot of people, the third law is this action and reaction. And I really like an analogy that Julie, did you meet Julie Share-No-Share?
I did. She's actually been on the show.
Okay, great. I really love her stuff. It's Time Hackers podcast. And she gave this analogy that, hey, your first move in any business or any side hustle is kind of like your first move in a game of chess. Like, it really doesn't matter. And she said, apologies to all the chess players out there. Like, if it really does matter, I don't know. It's kind of you're moving your pawn like two squares. It doesn't matter. The whole purpose of that is to get a reaction from your opponent, from your audience, from your potential customer. And I really, really like that analogy because it's like, hey, even no reaction is a reaction. It's like, well, clearly that didn't resonate, or that didn't hit home. And it's still like learning that skill. Like for me, I was blogging for 4 years pre Side Hustle Nation, and traffic was okay, but never really took off. And there'd be occasionally something would get shared around and it'd be a little bit of a hit, but for the most part, it was like crickets. And I was like, man, there's no reaction here. And it was like, fine, this is my creative outlet of writing. This is my actually had the kind of the cool side effect of learning how to do WordPress and playing around with SEO and like, all these other kind of side benefits as the action and reaction. But, for people trying to get started with a side hustle, I would specifically say it depends on your goals, right? So if you're stuck in a day job that's miserable and you want to get out, there's the fastest path to do that is going to be selling some sort of service, right? So if you take inventory of your skills, like by definition, any job you've ever had, like that's a skill somebody thought was worth paying for. So I would probably start with an inventory of your skills, and I would cross-reference that with kind of unique inventory of experience or interests or personal connections, like who you know in a, say you have like your wife or your best friend is like in real estate or something, but you've developed this skill in copywriting or something. So could you merge those two to come up with like a unique service offering? Like I know I could do copywriting for real estate agents, like if they need help with their marketing materials or their blog or whatever. I don't know if that's a great example, but something like that, trying to merge those two to find a sweet spot that you can go out and pitch. And bonus points if you can go out and pitch proactively. And that's where kind of like that sweet spot connection comes from. Because if you just say, hey, I'm a copywriter, it's very broad, and it's very hard to say to send targeted pitches, be like, I can help out you specifically because I'm like the go-to person to do copywriting for real estate agents. And instead you're kind of stuck bidding on freelance work, which can be tough to maintain prices and stuff.
Yeah, it's, one of the things that I've found, and this is just by going through what you've got on your site, and if you haven't been to Side Hustle Nation, I think that everyone kind of needs to check it out, is you've got a lot of experiments, because this is where we're going to start to get into some of the tactic stuff, right? But I want to talk about like the side hustle experiments that you've done. Is there any one in particular that you kind of stands out that was kind of random? I mean, the Fiverr one is one I noticed right away, where it's like, you earned almost $1,000 in 10 days doing video web audits of people's websites, right?
Yeah, the Fiverr one stands out, and this all started from a conversation with a guy who earned enough money on Fiverr to buy a house like within his first year, and I was like, hold on, how does this work? Because like, what could you sell that's possibly worth $5? I've been on Fiverr for a couple years prior to that as a buyer, but never once thought of using it as a seller. And he went on to explain, hey, it's the marketplace of goods and services starting at $5. Starting at is key, right? It's all about the upsells. In his case, it was all about, hey, the $5 gigs are meant to be kind of automated delivery, whether it's like something, a pre-created book, video, audio file that you can send somebody right away. And then if they want your time, they can buy that in the upsell. So I think one of the things that he was offering was like, I'll send you the 7 steps to a killer like autoresponder sequence for your email list. And, that was the $5 thing. And then in the upsells, like, I will write message number 1 for you. I will write message number 2. I will critique your existing series or something like that. And he went on, we actually did a follow-up. Now Fiverr lets you do custom quotes up to $10,000.
Wow.
We did a follow-up. He said he claims to have sold the first $10,000 Fiverr gig, and it was for a custom copywriting package.
Wow.
It just goes to show, he said, it's easier to take somebody from a $5 sale to a $10,000 sale than it is to take somebody from 0 to 1. It's like that inertia of like opening up their wallet and going above and beyond in your delivery, proving what you're worth, and saying, hey, well, this is what you really need. So I thought that was fascinating. So I gave it a shot. I started out with a couple, digital products, like actually a couple ebooks I repurposed from Amazon. I let like the Amazon exclusivity agreement expire, put them up on Fiverr, and actually sold pretty well. And then I got brave and started doing the video audits, which probably not the best hourly wage in the world, but if you kind of batch them, you can do them back to back to back. And those were a ton of fun. I've done, probably 500 or something at this point.
Wow. What other weird, like in terms of other side hustle projects, let me shift gears here for a second. But what's some of the other, I don't want to say other, because I was actually going to make that just Patreon only. So, Nick, some of the experiments that you've done, you mentioned Fiverr, of course, and for those of you who listen to Patreon, you can listen to what Nick said about that if you're a Patreon member. But if you're not, what other experiments have you done? Because I want to dive into those weird productivity tactics that you have. I've kind of been off the beaten path where you're like, either A, I can't believe the results I got, or B, in a good way or a bad way, or B, what was I thinking?
Yeah, so I've been playing around with the Kindle publishing stuff for a few years now. Some titles have done better than others. I've been playing around with building online courses on Udemy. I actually interviewed a guy. The stories that do best on the podcast are like the most like ridiculous sounding ones, right? I met a guy who makes a full-time living buying and selling stuff on Craigslist. And he's like, this has a very broad appeal. Every town has a Craigslist, or, up in Canada, what's the Kijiji or something it's called.
Yep.
And, and he's focused specifically on like appliances. It's like, could you imagine a harder to transport, like bulkier item? But he's like, hey, just buy low, sell high. It's a business model as old as business itself. And, he was making that happen and supporting a family of 7 doing it. I met another guy, you might know, Benny Shu.
Yep.
He had the app business for a long time, and he shifted gears to focus on Teespring, which is like a cool like print on demand like t-shirt site. And so he built that up like in a matter of months, like to do six figures over there. Despite like his first 21 campaigns failing. I was like, dude, I would not have had the fortitude to stick through 21 failures to see it through. And, all these kind of like freelancing stuff, all of this kind of, the latest one that I'm trying to get into, and this is kind of the hot side hustle of the moment, is like the e-commerce Amazon FBA stuff, which is fulfillment by Amazon. You can source products locally or have them manufactured that's kind of the more advanced way to do it. But what I've started with is trying to source products locally. Walmart, Best Buy, Babies R Us, TJ Maxx, Walgreens. You're looking for items that are on clearance. You scan them with the free Amazon seller app, and there's a couple premium paid ones you can use too. But I just started out with the free app. And you're looking for a spread between what that item is selling for locally and what that item is selling for on Amazon. You package all this stuff up into a box, ship it off to Amazon, and then they sell it for you. It's kind of seamless to the customer.
Wow.
Because it just ships from their warehouse. So that's kind of the hot side hustle of the moment that I've been playing around with.
How do you make all that stuff happen? Because I can't imagine going into. I prefer to buy from home. You won't get. First off, you can't catch me in a TJ Maxx because we don't have them here in Canada.
Yeah.
But or a Walgreens. But for me, I just you have to be really committed to make these kind of things happen. You really. And I think, this is your thing. This is what you do. How do you? You've obviously talked about how you plan things, but how do you find the time to kind of batch this kind of stuff together? When you make a decision to say, hey, I'm going to try this new thing, do you kind of say every month I'm going to try a new side hustle, or do you how do you map that stuff out?
Yeah, trying to allocate a certain percentage of your time to speculative work exactly. That may or may not pay off down the road. But, given the nature of the content on the site, it's you kind of have to be constantly filling the bucket. Even if it doesn't work, at least I'll have something to write about.
It's the same reason why people go, why do you always use different task apps? I'm like, because that's my job. I'm the one that I have my own approach I take to it. So let's see if I can make my approach. But that's part of what I have to do. And some of them it works with and some of it doesn't. So how do you allocate that? How do you make sure that you say, okay, what's the balance between what's speculative and what is solid?
Yeah, I've written on this before, kind of in active income versus passive income. It's just you can do client work, you can do freelancing work, all day, every day. But the minute you stop, the income stops. And so a certain percentage of your time, especially after you've reached a certain level or certain comfort level, you can start investing in building passive assets, whether that's books, whether that's courses, whether this Amazon business is not completely passive because you're still going to have to source inventory for it. But you can see how it's a little bit more time leveraged where, the moment that sale occurs, you didn't actually have to do anything. It's, more, I'm putting in the time up front to do it. Plus, it's, like you said, it's my job to test this out and, share my results with it because that's been a very popular way to go this year, especially with the importing and private labeling. That's kind of the advanced stuff these days.
All right. One more thing before, and by the way, I got a link to that in the show notes. Your time tracking results. Your decidedly 4-hour work week.
I know.
And passive versus people who listen to this podcast definitely know what the 4-hour work week is, and it's interesting. If you've ever heard Tim Ferriss talk about it, he doesn't talk that title, and this if you've read the book, obviously.
Yes.
The idea of the 4-hour work week, it's the key operative thing there is work. What he does doesn't feel like work to him. So he actually only spends 4 hours working, really. That's kind of what it boils down to. But passive, and it's also, frankly, a catchy title that will sell a lot of books. He makes no apologies for that too. But before we dive into the weird hacks, because yes, there are a few, and they're not. Here's the thing: is to me, they're not necessarily totally weird, but how you approach them might be. But I want to talk a little bit about this freedom number that you've got on your website. So,
okay.
Because I think that that's important. I mean, as somebody who, I could have used your site back when I was leaving my job, because I basically, what I was doing was working 80 hours a week by the time I left the film festival, because I was working 40 hours online doing blogging and all that stuff, as well as building up Productivityist, as well as working 40 hours with the festival. Mm-hmm. I could have very much used this, not just what you offer, but this idea of how much do I need to quit my job? Like how much, because what I ended up doing the first time when I quit Costco, I quit again based on, I didn't fully quit. I just went down to part-time. So that wasn't a full-off jump. I was a very calculated risk. But when I left the film festival, I jumped not without a net, but without knowing full well, what's this number that I need? There was so much going on. There was 80 hours of work happening a week that I just said, there's a lot of money coming in. We should be fine. Which is not the strategy I would recommend anybody take.
I was gonna say, that's pretty brave.
It is brave, because as soon as I quit, Envato sold Work Awesome and all those other, they closed down the Net Setter, which I was editing, so that was half my money that was going to go away, and then Work Awesome got sold shortly thereafter. So luckily I did work for Cult of Mac, and then I became the managing editor of Lifehack, and everyone who's listening that's listened for a long time knows the rest of the story. But that is not a path I recommend for most people. Tell us about the freedom number. Because I think that having that measurable thing that people can at least look to, or at least refer to, can really go a long way in making a responsible choice and a measured decision when it comes to this kind of thing.
Yeah, so one of the very first business books I read was Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And it's kind of a variation on his formula. This is, hey, when income from assets exceeds your monthly fixed expenses, that's it. You've made it. You're financially free. You can do whatever you want at this point. And it's kind of a very freeing, very empowering moment. And so that's kind of what the freedom number is. We spend a lot of time focusing on the income side, but at least in my past, didn't spend a lot of time focusing on the expense side. And that's really what drives a lot of this stuff. If I need $3,000 a month to cover my rent, my mortgage, my grocery bill, my childcare, my insurance, my car payments, insurance, all of this stuff adds up. And rather than saying I need to replace my day job income, which hopefully is higher than your expenses, you really only need, at least to make that initial leap, you really only need hopefully a much smaller number, that that fixed expense number. And so that's kind of where the freedom number comes from in terms of the side hustle. It's hey, if my side hustle is generating, or given an extra 40 hours a week, I could see it easily generating that much. That's when it might make sense to make that leap.
Awesome. So there you go. And what I also want to share with people is another link that's going to be in the show notes, is the 5-step system to quit your job in the next 12 months, which is Brian Harris's. Brian and you did this together, right? You both did this. You had a recording with him. Is that kind of how this went down?
Brian is one of the smartest people you can follow online if you're interested in entrepreneurship, starting a business. And he just broke it down. Here's what I would do. In fact, here's exactly what I did do to quit my job in 12 months. Step 1, step 2, step 3. And it's one of the most popular episodes of the show.
Well, Nick, that's pretty much it for this week. We've talked about a lot. For those of you who have the Patreon edition, of course, you got to hear a little bit more. If you're interested in supporting the show via Patreon, go to patreon.com/productivityist. There is a slew of tiers that you can decide if you want to contribute at that level. Anything from $1 all the way up to $100 a month, which includes shipping of special hand-picked packages that I send out every 4 months. There's also the ability, we talked about Teespring. I'm looking at getting a t-shirt done. That's for people at that $100 level. They're going to get that. And I may even throw that into another tier at some point, or create another tier. But head over to patreon.com/productivity, and you'll get the whole podcast that we just did, the whole discussion between myself and Nick Loper. For those of you who didn't, still a lot of great stuff here. Nick, thanks so much for being here on the show today. Where can people find you when you are not having cold showers or walking 1 mile per hour on your fancy treadmill desk?
Hit me up at sidehustlenation.com, and my Mike, you referenced the ideas post, and so that's 79 Side Hustle Ideas, and it's just at sidehustlenation.com/ideas. Very good place to start.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nick, and we will see all of you next week. Again, a great time had by all on this show, I think, especially the two people who were talking through most of it, myself and Nick Loper. Thanks to Nick for joining me on the show this week. You can head to all of the links that we talked about during the show just by going to the show notes or heading over to the podcast page. We've got a blog post up about the podcast too, so you can check that over at productivityist.com. If you want to hear the whole episode and you want to get more content and hear more of my voice coming through your earbuds, then what you can do is head over to patreon.com/productivityist and become a supporter. There are varying degrees of support and varying levels of perks that you can get, as well as, of course, you'll get the 4 additional podcasts per week, the little short ones that I do Monday through Thursday, as well as the entire weekly episode. You get an abridged version of it here, but you get the entire weekly episode if you become a Patreon supporter, as well as become a member of our exclusive Slack community. So head over to patreon.com/productivityist and you can join us and the thriving community that is over there. We're just hanging out talking about productivity, which I think is great. Thanks again so much to Nick for joining me this week. Thanks to all of you for joining me this week. We've got a lot of great stuff coming up as the year wraps to a close. We're recording this, as December begins, and as we get close to the end of the year, I know you guys are wrapping things up and then getting ready to ramp things up as we head into the new year. So before I let you go, just think about trying to end the year strong, but don't push yourself to the point where you can't enjoy the holiday season. So let's make sure that we know that there's always something that's going to have to be done. You're never going to get it all done. So make sure you have some nice harmony going into the end of the year. That's one of my words for 2016 is harmony, and I hope that you have plenty of it, not just this week, but beyond. Until next time, I am Mike Vardy, the host of the Productivityist podcast and the founder of Productivityist, reminding you to stop guessing and start going. Have a great week.